Formula One's off-track controversies show no sign of abating in 2024. What's more, the string of negative headlines has exposed F1's lack of leadership at a time when it's under fire on and off track. The latest big story is F1 Academy Managing Director Susie Wolff filing a criminal complaint in France. That was lodged back on March the 4th, but only recently revealed publicly via social media. Wolff's defamation complaint relates to what she calls statements made about me by the FIA last December. For those of you who have forgotten what happened then, and who can blame you given there have been so many controversies, this was when the FIA said it was looking into what it described as a claim of information of a confidential nature being passed to an F1 team principal from a member of FOM personnel. FOM, of course, is Formula One Management, owned by F1 commercial rights holder Liberty Media. That was announced on December the 6th. 2 days later, it was confirmed that there was no ongoing investigation and that the FIA is satisfied that FOM's compliance management system is robust enough to prevent any unauthorised disclosure of confidential information. So what was this all about? Well, Susie Wolff was not named publicly by the FIA, neither was husband Toto Wolff, team principal of Mercedes, but media reports following the FIA's initial statement identified them as the parties involved, so the implication was that information had been passed from FOM to Mercedes by Susie Wolff to Toto. Mercedes later referred in a statement about this to an off-record briefing that linked this investigation to the Wolffs. The other F1 teams had also issued a flurry of statements denying having lodged any complaint regarding the allegation. They also professed their support for Wolff in her F1 Academy role. That was after the FIA's initial statement that it was looking into confidential information being shared. The FIA's announcement there was no longer an ongoing investigation understandably did not satisfy Wolff. She suggested that she might have been collateral damage in an unsuccessful attack on somebody else or the target of an attempt to discredit me personally. Wolff says her criminal complaint is because of the lack of transparency or accountability in relation to the conduct of the FIA and its personnel in this matter. She also stressed the importance of calling out what she called improper behaviour and holding people to account. As she put it, whilst some may think silence absolves them from responsibility, it does not. As this is a criminal complaint, this case ups the ante when it comes to the ongoing friction between F1 teams and the FIA. As always, the wheels of justice turn slowly. To lodge the complaint, Wolff will have compiled a dossier of evidence. Crucial to this will be proving that the FIA was indeed responsible for identifying Susie and Toto Wolff as the parties involved. If that link can be proven, and the Wolffs must be confident of doing so given Susie has launched this action, then it could cause some big problems for the FIA and President Mohammed Ben Sulayem. But those hoping for an epic courtroom drama full of twists, turns and surprise witnesses will be disappointed. This won't be conducted with a cinematic flourish. Instead, an investigator is appointed to review the evidence provided. They will also gather their own evidence, which should include gathering witness statements. It will likely be several months at least before the outcome is known. The key question it's hoped the investigation will answer will be why the FIA looked into this in the first place, whether or not it did indeed brief any media outlets, and in doing so identify those involved, and if, as a result, Susie Wolff was indeed defamed. The question of whether a complaint was lodged to trigger the investigation or the FIA started it unilaterally following media reports could also fall within the scope of the investigation, although that's far from certain. But in the wider F1 context, it could bring some welcome transparency at a time when the simmering political war between the FIA and Liberty Media is at the heart of almost continuous controversy. Whatever the verdict is, it could have enormous repercussions for the FIA and F1. This case in isolation is remarkable, but unfortunately is far from the only problem F1 faces. That's because Wolff is far from the only person in F1 to call for greater transparency when it comes to the FIA's activities. McLaren's CEO Zak Brown has been at the forefront of these calls, saying in Australia that we're living in 2024, not 1984, which means total transparency. Brown's Orwellian reference was apt given the wider perception of F1 as a somewhat dystopian world right now. And he's far from the only one to issue repeated demands for transparency, not just when it comes to the Wolff vs FIA case, but also to the recent internal investigations into Ben Sulayem, which we'll get to later, and Red Bull's much publicised investigation into team principal Christian Horner's conduct. Transparency is one of those laudable things to call for, but the devil is in the detail. During the Friday press conference in Melbourne, I asked the 4 team bosses who are on the stand, so to speak, what needs to happen to deliver on that desire for transparency. They said it was about the correct process and trusting the governance. But as RB CEO Peter Bayer warned, transparency doesn't simply mean everyone knowing all of the details of what's going on. Instead, it's about enough being known to be fully confident the process has been followed correctly and that, crucially, the verdicts of internal investigations can therefore be trusted. And it's not just team bosses who are calling for that. Mercedes driver Lewis Hamilton backed Susie Wolff's action and praised her for taking it outside of the world of F1, i.e. to French courts. He argues that accountability is essential for fans. What's clear is that nobody is entirely convinced that due process really has been followed, and the lack of faith in the FIA means many struggle to take it on trust that it is governing as responsibly as F1 demands. Prior to the Australian Grand Prix, the FIA announced that 2 investigations into the actions of President Mohammed Ben Sulayem concluded that claims against him were unsubstantiated. This followed investigations that lasted a month, including interviews with 11 witnesses. By coincidence, or perhaps by design, the press release revealing Ben Sulayem had been cleared was released on the same day as Wolff announced her criminal complaint. There were 2 allegations being investigated. The first was that Ben Sulayem attempted to influence the stewards to overturn a 10-second penalty that cost Fernando Alonso and Aston Martin third place in the 2023 Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. That penalty was indeed overturned, meaning Alonso got third place back after stewards accepted there were precedents for Aston Martin having the rear jack connected to the car while a pit stop penalty was served. The second allegation was that Ben Sulayem attempted to interfere with the track certification process in Las Vegas last year to prevent the track being homologated. The FIA Compliance Department, supported by external advisors, conducted the investigation and compiled reports. Based on these, the FIA's 6-person ethics committee was unanimous in its verdict that there was no evidence to substantiate either of these allegations. The FIA's press release about the verdict also praised Ben Sulayem's cooperation. As per the ethics committee rules, when the president is involved in a case, the reports were submitted to the FIA Senate for consideration. However, F1 teams were not given any information about the investigation besides what was publicly announced. Brown complained about that in Australia, saying nothing was explained to the teams, which relied on media reports and the FIA's press release for information. Based on what the FIA has said, the investigation was conducted according to the process laid out in its statutes. However, given the lack of transparency about how the evidence was weighed up, in particular that of the whistleblower, is that really good enough? While the FIA stresses the independence of such investigations, to the watching world it seems worryingly like an organisation marking its own homework. Therefore, it's surely in the best interests of the FIA to further increase transparency to demonstrate that is indeed the case. Ben Sulayem has defended himself and the FIA, hitting out against the allegations in a letter he recently sent to members. This claimed the complaints against him were motivated by the desire to undermine him and the FIA. He stressed his commitment to what he called an environment of transparency, accountability and unwavering integrity within the FIA. However, these investigations are just the latest in a long line of controversies surrounding Ben Sulayem. He has faced allegations of sexism and bullying, has clashed repeatedly with FOM over issues such as the new team application process that led to the FIA approving the Andretti bid and F1 itself rejecting it, and questioned the financial management of the FIA by the previous regime led by Jean Todt. It's important to stress that Ben Sulayem has at no stage been found guilty of any wrongdoing. However, he has consistently been engulfed in controversy. Given all of that, perhaps he would benefit from actively pushing for greater transparency over these matters, even if it's above what the FIA statutes demand, provided, of course, there is nothing to hide. With F1 constantly grabbing headlines for all the wrong reasons in 2024, the lack of leadership has been shockingly exposed in recent months. That's not just a criticism of Ben Sulayem. F1 is effectively run by a combination of the FIA as the regulator and commercial rights holder Liberty Media. Amid all of this, Formula One Group CEO Stefano Domenicali has been conspicuous by his absence when it comes to tackling any of this publicly. Not only does F1 look terrible to the outside world in terms of the infighting and politics as the FIA and FOM grapple for power, but it also looks rudderless when it comes to the legitimate question marks over whether the working environment is as it should be for female staff, given the high-profile Red Bull investigation into Horner. An investigation that, it must be stressed, cleared him, but that continues to be a talking point because of the complainant's appeal. F1's growth in recent years means that the true test of leadership comes when the tough questions are being asked. But amid all this controversy, combined with a predictable season on track, that public leadership has been entirely lacking. No wonder F1 looks terrible to the watching world. With some of the worst expectations of the F1 bubble seemingly confirmed by the inaction and paralysis of leadership, it's been a disastrous few months. Hopefully, Susie Wolff's action really can bring about a change to ensure the transparency and accountability that is in everyone's interest really is there.